What is your favorite paradox? Actually, there are two kinds of people in this world, those who believe there are two kinds of people in this world and those who are smart enough to know better. Tom Robbins. My favorite is, there are two kinds of people in the world. People that can extrapolate information from missing data. I don't know if I've ever seen a Tom Robbins quote on Reddit before. So happy to see one. Paradox of needing a banking account to get a home and a proof of address to open a bank account. The more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. Every time you gain a greater understanding about something, it creates even more questions than it answers. As our circle of knowledge expands, so does the circumference of darkness surrounding it. Albert Einstein. This is exactly how I felt after getting my MA in literature. Some of my friends think I should be an expert in all things literature. But they don't understand that research and reading about literature for a mere 2 to 6 years, including my BA, is like watching 50 YouTube videos and saying you've seen it all. The surprise hanging, a prisoner was sentenced to death by hanging, but as an additional punishment he was told he'd be hung sometime in the next week, but he'd not be told until the morning of. He reasons that it can't be Friday, because that's the last possible day, and so it wouldn't be a surprise, which means it also can't be Thursday, because it can't be Friday, and so if he's alive by Thursday then he needs to hang that day. Apply same reasoning to the other days of the week. He died Wednesday, caught by surprise. I like this one too. My solution is that prisoner fucked himself. By his logic he wouldn't get hanged, but by concluding he wouldn't get hanged he made it so he'd be surprised on any day, including Friday. This is a fun one. I took a class where the professor said there would be a surprise test at some point during the semester. We used this argument to show that there couldn't be a surprise test, so he cancelled it. Awesome guy. Pinocchio's nose paradox. If Pinocchio says the phrase, "my nose will grow," it creates a paradox. This is because if it grows, then he's telling the truth, but since it only grows when he's lying, it shouldn't grow. But if it doesn't grow, then he lied, so it should grow. Which means he's telling the truth, but if. Edit, lots of people have pointed out that this may not be a paradox. I should say I made a slight mistake and it works better when he says, "my nose will grow now." So he's talking about the immediate present and not a future time, which breaks the paradox. I had to Google that and I found it's representative of the liar paradox. Like if you were to say, "I am lying." If you're lying then, you told the truth, which means you just lied. That being said, I'm sure there's still arguments against this, but it's still fun to try and wrap your head around if you're not getting too technical. He would explode. I think it depends on what Pinocchio himself thinks will happen. Statistical paradoxes are cool. For example, Simpson's paradox, where a statistical trend is reversed when the population is partitioned into groups. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was supported by 61% of Democrats and 80% of Republicans. However, both Southern and Northern Democrats were more likely to support the act than their Republican colleagues. White murderers in Florida are more likely to receive the death penalty than African Americans. However, African Americans whose victims were white are more likely to be executed than whites, as are African Americans whose victims were black. Median wages in the US rose by 1% between 2000 and 2013, yet wages of every educational subgroup, school dropouts, school graduates, college graduates and higher degrees, fell during the same period. The overall survival rates for third-class passengers on the Titanic were higher than those for the crew, yet those for both men and women were lower. The batting averages of baseball player David Justice were higher than those of Derek Jeter in both 1995 and 1996, but not in the 2 years combined. For anyone curious, I took a look at that last example to wrap my head around this. Basically it comes down to Justice having a much higher percentage of his at-bats come from his lower BA year, whereas Jeter has a large percentage of his total at-bats from his higher BA year. player, year hits at bats average justice, 95 104 411.253 justice, 96 45 140.321 justice, total 149 551.270 jita, 95 12 48.250 jita, 96 183 582.314 jita, total 195 630.310. How does this work? The first example in particular confuses me. Pilots can get out of combat duty if they are psychologically unfit, but anyone who tries to get out of combat duty proves he is sane. Excellent. The paragraph from Catch-22 by Joseph Heller may be the greatest I've ever read. There was only one catch, and that was Catch-22, which specified that a concern for one's safety in the face of dangers that were real and immediate was the process of a rational mind. Or was crazy and could be grounded. All he had to do was ask, and as soon as he did, he would no longer be crazy and would have to fly more missions. Or would be crazy to fly more missions and sane if he didn't, but if he was sane he had to fly them. If he flew them he was crazy and didn't have to, but if he didn't want to he was sane and had to. Yossarian was moved very deeply by the absolute simplicity of this clause of Catch-22 and let out a respectful whistle. That's some catch, that Catch-22, he observed. It's the best there is, Dr. Nico agreed. Joseph Heller, Catch-22, Catch-22, number 1. That's a Catch-22, excellent book for anyone who hasn't read it. Ocarina of Time Bootstrap Paradox. As a child you meet a happy man in a windmill. Time travel, so you are an adult, you meet the same man who is angered by a child who played a song that summoned a storm that caused the windmill to drain a nearby well. He teaches you the song. Travel back in time and you play the song at the windmill, causing the above events. Where did the song come from? Where did the cycle begin? Or as Doctor Who put it, you love Beethoven. You know everything about him, and his music. You create a time machine, and the first place you go is to visit Beethoven and get him to sign some copies of his music. Only, you can't find Beethoven. His family and friends don't know who he is. His music has never been played before. Using your copies of his music, you copy the music out very careful, and sign it as Beethoven. So the question is this: who wrote Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? Zelda Multiverse Theory. Each time Link modifies the past, he creates a new future. He's not modifying the same future over and over. In all versions of Hyrule, the Composer brothers exist, and, at least in Termina, they wrote the Song of Storms, so it's retroactively implied that the song, at least, exists independently of the loop. So the question of the loop is, how did Link from PA learn it? Perhaps in the Prime timeline, that version of Link learned the song from the Composer brothers, since he had no way of learning it through this self-contained loop. Then he went back and played it for the Windmill Man, before warping off to a new future. Then a new Link warps into that time thanks to the Master Chief's sword, learns about it, warps back, and starts the cycle. There's also the theory that the songs themselves do nothing, it's the intent behind them that does it all, so Link could have played any set of notes, but as long as the intent was to cause a storm to drain the well, it would have worked. Basically, it's a reverse Scarecrow's song. After all, until you actually learn that the Bolero of Fire can warp you to Death Mountain, you cannot actually warp to Death Mountain by playing the Bolero of Fire. It's only once Link knows that it warps him that he can warp there. So right is paradox. When EXACTLY does heap of a million grains of sand turn into a non-heap when you take away grains of sand one at a time? About 7. I guess the answer would be that heaps don't objectively exist. Even though we find it obvious a heap is a heap. Makes me wonder, what other stuff doesn't objectively exist? Chairs? Humans themselves? If time travel was invented in the future we would have it now. I think according to string theory we would be able to travel to the past, but not in our own timeline. It would be in a separate, parallel universe. Not if it's only a one-way trip. Time is relative to gravity, and as far as we know, it only moves forward. I see no reason to think that backwards time travel is possible. Forwards though, it already exists. They tested the time/gravity theory by launching an atomic clock with the space shuttle. It ran faster than its counterpart on the ground. Subscribe for more hot Reddit takes in your inbox, guaranteed.